Hello everybody and welcome back to a new section in our Learning Bootstrap 4 course. We are starting off a new section which is called Forms and Tables, where we'll take a look at how to use Bootstrap Forms in general. Then we will combine that knowledge into creating our sign-in and registration page, and at the end of the section we'll take a look at how to use Bootstrap tables and how to create our pricing page based on that knowledge. So let's start off with a general introduction to Bootstrap Forms, where we will learn how to use Bootstrap Forms in general, what are some of the forms layouts that we could use, as well as some of the form helpers that might come in handy. And in the end, we are going to take a look at the default Bootstrap for validation and talk about some tips and tricks for designing better and more optimized forms. So for now, I've simply created this simple page where we will take a look at some of the code examples that we have here. So we have a few basic inputs. One is this, let's call it a regular text type input. Then we have a drop down and one checkbox and one radio box. So again, we'll go down to the code level and see how this looks. So for this page, I simply added a new container with a row and the column D12. Then I added a little helper class, which we will actually use later, called formBox, but for now, all that does is set some margins and widths. So to initiate a form in Bootstrap 4, all you have to actually do is start off with a form element, and then it's always a good idea to use form groups just so you get better spacing and of course better visibility of your form elements. Plus, in some cases, it's really nice to have another, let's call it a parent div to whatever you're going to have inside of it. So after the form group element, we start off with a label. All you need to do is add a class of form control label. And the reason why you'll be fine without it, even if you don't add it, it will still look pretty good. Actually, it will still look the same. But the reason why we are adding it here is validation. And of course, we will get to that later. But it's always a good idea to have this class on your label. And while we are speaking of labels, in terms of designing forms, it's always a good idea to have labels above input fields. This makes the form more user-friendly. The user, when he's scanning the page, the user knows what the input is referring to. He can always check it out versus, for example, just defining a placeholder gets overridden by the text that you entered, and then if it's a really long form, by the time you fill it out and you might want to correct something or check something, you don't know if you've entered the correct thing in the correct spot. So always a good idea to have labels, especially above the input field. Then we move on to the input itself, where we basically have a class of form control, which again you have to have, and it takes care of some of the sizing, margins, paddings, and everything else. Again, this is a type of email. Bootstrap 4 supports different types of styling when it comes to forms, so you could have something like tell or even password, and they will all be styled differently, but of course you could always just have and use text. Another note here, if you're using text, you can see that we can type in anything that we want, but if we actually return to email and check right now, you will see that if we start typing and don't enter an email, the browser will do automatic validation and basically tell you that this field is wrong. So it's always kind of a good idea to provide correct input types on input elements. So this basically takes care of all your, well, the vast majority of your form needs, because in most cases you will be using general input type text or text area, which is basically the same as this. A bit different though is, of course, the select element, which again we have the form group element, form control label, and the form control itself. So it's similar to this, except of course using the HTML select option, and it actually has some nice and better styling than it usually has, thanks to the Bootstrap CSS. Now we move on to the checkbox element that we have here, which this time has a bit of a different structure. So we are wrapping all checkboxes into a class of form check, followed by a label that again is using form check label instead of form control and form group. And then we give the checkbox element itself right here, and we added a class of form check input, which again should give you better styling than it usually is by default in all browsers. The same, of course, applies to the radio elements. This time we are grouping it in a field set. You could also group it into a div. It doesn't matter as long as it's following the same pattern, which is form group, form check. As you can see, we're using form group above because essentially we will be grouping multiple form checks elements. So this is option 1, this is option 2. So again, it's using form check label and then form check input, and the rest is default HTML. Now in Bootstrap 4, you actually do get some custom checkboxes and radios that you could explore if you want, but most likely you will be using a third party for this purpose. The same way you would probably be using third-party jQuery or JavaScript plugin like Chosen for your dropdowns. So if you just type in chosen.js, you will get to this page, and you can essentially turn this input that we have into something much more nicer and even more useful, because for example you can search for things, you can even use it as tags like here, and basically all you need to do is add this jQuery plugin. So now that we've taken a look at some of the form basics, we can start exploring what we could do. So for example, let's say we wanted to have an inline form that basically uses the Bootstrap grid system. Well, to do that, all we actually need to do is change some classes. So I've already prepared them right here, and we can basically take a look. So if we come to our form, you will see that right now we're using this structure. All we need to actually do is add a row class to the form group, add basically a call sm3 or whatever, call md3 or whatever we want right here to control the sizing of our label, and of course we need to do the same for the input element itself. And if we take a look, you will see that we now have an inline form. Of course, we could do that with the drop down element itself. So again, we do this, we add the class of row just to make sure Bootstrap gets it right, and voila, we now have an inline form where the label is on the left side and the input form is on the right side. Again, this is a combination of Bootstrap Forms and the Bootstrap grid system, but it works pretty well if you have a really small form or you need to get done something like this very quickly. Now, another thing that Bootstrap allows out of the box is, for example, helper text. So if we wanted to add some helper text, all we need to do is add a p-class of form text, and if we want to kind of mute it or fade it away a bit, we can add the text muted. And if we check how it looks, it's really convenient if you want to add an additional message to a user or basically tell him to do something or tell him what you are expecting of the user to enter in this field. And the last thing we quickly want to check out is actually the validation. So Bootstrap has some validation options out of the box. Again, you will probably be using a third-party jQuery plugin for something like this, which we might cover here. But for now, we'll start adding a few classes so you see how this works. Now, the first thing we need to do is we need to add, for example, has success or has danger or has warning on the element with the class of form group. So this will essentially control the styling of everything inside of the form group, including labels, inputs, and, for example, the text that we just put in place. Next, we need to add form control success, and I will tell you why in a second, to the input field. And of course, we probably want to have some description text like I just noted, and we are going to use form control feedback for that text. So if we take a look at what we've done here, you will see that actually everything checks out. So we kind of do have a nice green color here, even a green check icon. Now, the reason why we have a check icon is because we have added form control success to this input element. And by default, if we take a look at the Bootstrap CSS, it comes with some of the form validation icons. We will probably be using something like Font Awesome and another third-party jQuery plugin to do this, but if you need to, you can always replace these, for now, SVG icons that you can see right here with something of your own. Now, again, this is a rare example that we are using success, so more likely you will be using danger, which will probably tell the user that he has done something wrong. You'll see that we've kind of actually changed the color of it, so now it's red, it has a little cross icon, and now of course our text should be something more appropriate. So it should be no, this failed. So now the user kind of knows that something has went wrong. Again, you will probably in real life be using jQuery validation plugin like this, form validation. I'm currently using formvalidation.io, and it has support for Bootstrap 3 and 4. It really is a great plugin. It's very easy to get started, and again, it supports all the possible validators that you need out of the box, and all the frameworks that you actually might need.